Welcome back to my channel. My name is Carolina and today I want to show you a tutorial for my new sewing pattern called Freya. It's a pattern for a Scandinavian style quilted jacket. My fabric that I'm using, it's already pre-quilted, something that I've been missing without knowing that I was missing. I'm so obsessed with this yellow color. It makes you look like a sunshine, and I'm a little bit scared to cut into this fabric because I ordered it all the way from Canada. And for this project, I'm gonna use my new sewing pattern that is now available on my website and on my Etsy. I'll put a link in the description and somewhere over here. And then also, as a little bit of disclaimer, on the pattern pieces it's gonna say cut 2 pieces in the main fabric, cut 2 pieces in the wadding, batching, and then 2 pieces in lining. And because my fabric is already quilted, I'm just gonna cut 2 pieces in this fabric. But if your fabric is not quilted yet, well, you need to do so before cutting out. And yeah, let's get on it. Let's start the sewing tutorial with the pockets. I'm gonna bind both pockets using 2 different techniques. I'm gonna use a 2 cm wide binding to do so. I'm gonna start with the outer edge, be very careful on the corners to make sure that I capture the fabric inside. And once you get till the end, I'm gonna make a small back tack stitch, then I'm gonna cut the thread, and with the extra binding, now I'm just gonna kind of pinch it together with my fingers so I have a little of arrow shape, push it towards the fabric, and then fold it over. So now you have one continuous line and it looks very neat. My machine struggles at the beginning a little bit, so I was helping it. And then I'm just gonna continue to bind the top edge of the pocket. And once I get to the end, I'm just gonna cut a little bit before, and I'm gonna cut the extra binding edges inside just to remove the bulkiness, and I'm gonna fold the binding inside and then top stitch right to the end of the edge. And this is how the pocket looks like. It's so neat and so easy. Use only one continuous line of binding, which is great. The only thing is that 2 corners are gonna look a little bit different. So if you mind it, I'll have another technique for you. For the second technique, we're gonna start the same way. I'm gonna start from the outer edge and continue to bind the pocket right till the end. But then I'm just gonna cut the binding. I'll place the binding flat and put the pocket over it. Mark how wide is my pocket, the top edge, and then I'm gonna take the binding and fold it out in the opposite direction. Make a small stitch on both ends. Here I'm gonna make a small back tack stitch on both sides. Then of course I'm gonna trim out extra seam allowance and any threads, and then using the scissors I'm gonna back them out to create a small pocket, if you wish, for the seam allowance. Of course I'm gonna repeat the same steps on the other side. And now we can just insert the seam allowance, the top edge of the pocket, inside of the binding, and this is how it's supposed to look like. And then I'm just gonna top stitch the top edge of the pocket. And this is how it's supposed to look like. Seriously, this technique is so easy. It just very much depends which one do you prefer. This one is so cute, and the good thing is they look good on both sides. On this side you can see that I made it a little bit too long, but I don't mind it as it won't be too visible. I'm gonna add 2 pins to secure it in place, and then I'm gonna top stitch the pocket to the jacket. And of course, I'm going to repeat the same steps on both sides. And now that I'm top stitching the pocket to the jacket, I'm going to do it on the outer seam of the binding. And if you want some extra strength in your pocket, you can also run another top stitch on the previous stitch line that we just did. That's going to make sure that the pocket is really secured in place. At the top, you're gonna make a back tag stitch, and now as you can see, our pockets are ready. They look so beautiful, and now we can move on to adding the lining to the front panels. I'm gonna use clips to place them in a position. And then we're gonna sew them together to keep them in place. And before I do that with my back panel, I'm just gonna really quickly attach my label to the lining. I find it so therapeutic to sew in the label. I think it's my favorite part of any sewing project. And now, just like we did with the front, I'm gonna pin together the back lining and the back main piece together. And of course, repeat the same steps with both of the sleeves. I'm gonna change the stitch length on my sewing machine to the longest. And then with the lining at the bottom and main fabric on the top, I'm gonna sew them together by less than a ½ centimeter. We just wanna make sure that those two panels are together and they're not moving. It doesn't take too long to make it, but it's gonna help you in the future, especially when we're gonna bind those edges. It's so much easier when two pieces are not moving later on. And as you can see, because my lining is a little bit stretchy, it shifted a little bit. So I just need to trim the extra amount that just shifted. And now with the back panel facing the right side, I'm gonna place two front panels on top and sew together the shoulder seam. And this is how it's supposed to look like. And as the next step, we need to trim the seam allowance. Just be very careful not to cut through the stitch line. In this area, just cut off a little bit of seam allowance, leave a bit more just so it's more secure. And then I'm gonna bind it with 2 centimeter wide binding. And this is how it's supposed to look like. As you can see on the sleeve, there's a little gap that I didn't catch the lining with the main fabric, but don't worry about that, we're gonna fix it later. And now moving on, I'm gonna bind the bottom edge of the sleeve. And this is how our pockets are looking. Seriously, they look so adorably cute. Then I'm gonna turn my jacket to the wrong side and cut any extra binding that is just sticking out. And then I'm gonna place the jacket and open it flat, facing right side up. I'm gonna take the sleeve and fold it in half to determine where is the middle. And I'm gonna put it under the side seam. And from that point, I'm gonna align the front and the back equally. I'll repeat the steps on the left and on the right side. As you can see, this is the section where I also missed the lining, so I'm just extra careful over here to make sure that I'm catching every single layer of the fabric. For this tutorial, I'm using two bindings. One is 2 cm wide and another one that I have is 3 cm wide. I'll use the 3 cm wide binding in an area where I didn't want to cut off any seam allowance, so I'll just see how it goes after. So take your time over here and be very careful because we are sewing through many layers of fabric at this point. And then moving on to the front of the jacket, I'm gonna bind the bottom seam and the opening of the jacket as well as the back seam, starting from the side seam right to the center back. For the binding, I'm going to use 2 cm wide binding, and I'm going to start from the side seam of the front. And as I showed you the first technique to do the pocket, I'm going to use it over here. So once I get to the edge, I'll stop and I'm going to fold the edges a little bit into like triangle shape, press it against the other edge and continue to sew them together. And again, just like I did with the pocket, my machine struggled just a little bit, so I'm giving it a little bit of a push to help it out. And as you can see, you cannot really plan those things in advance, but I found a join seam of the binding, so it's right next to the neckline. It's not ideal, but there's nothing I can do now. As I go right to the edge of the neckline, I'm just going to repeat the same steps as we did before with every single corner, and I'm going to repeat to do so with the rest of the jacket. Once you get to the shoulder seam, just be very careful and go very slow to make sure that you're catching the seam allowance into this binding as well. And this is how the jacket's supposed to look like. We're almost finished. It already looks amazing. This is how the corners of the neckline look like. They are so neat, so pretty. I'm so happy with this technique. And now I left out a little bit extra of the binding on the side seams just so I can cut them evenly together. And this is how the neckline looks like. I'm just making sure that I cut all the seam allowance. So now moving back to the armholes again, I'm gonna trim the seam allowance from the armholes. Again, be very careful over here and make sure that you don't cut through the stitch line. Using a little bit of magic. And believe it or not, but this is the last step of making this jacket. So now we have to pin together the sleeve, the underarm, and the side seam. And repeat the same step on the other side. Just also watch out for the direction of the seam allowance from the armhole. You also want to make sure that it goes away from the body towards the armhole, not other way around. And I would say this was the trickiest part of making this jacket, since at this point we are sewing almost through 8 layers of fabric. So it depends which fabric are you using. You might probably not be struggling, or you might be struggling just as me to push this fabric through. And once you finish, this is how it's supposed to look like. The side seam looks absolutely neat and amazing. And as I looked on my seam when they were finished, I decided that I didn't want to cut anything off, and if I wanted to use 2 cm binding, it wouldn't cover completely the seam. That's why I decided to go with the other binding that I had, which was 3 cm long. This way, I'm gonna capture the whole seam allowance inside. Here we're gonna use the technique that I showed you in the second option of the pocket. It's when you fold the binding all the way around. You make that back tack stitch, you then trim the seam allowance and you bag it out. And this is going to be your beginning of the binding. So I'll start binding from the sleeve right to the bottom hem. I'll also use a little tool to help me out to push the fabric in the beginning. It was a bit tricky to start. And I think right underarm, that was where the tricky area was, but I felt like I did pretty well. I hit all the threads, all the seams inside. And now as you get to the end, just mark using a chalk the end of where the hem ends, and then trim off a little bit extra over that, just about the 1 centimeter. And then fold the binding inside and top stitch to the finish. And this is how the jacket looks like. Seriously, it looks so much better in real life. It's very neat, it's very structured. I feel like those binded seams added that extra structure to this jacket, which I really love. And of course, the best part about those jackets is that you can play around with a different color of binding and different color of lining. As extra step, you can also bag out the sleeves to show the contrast lining. And of course, for this jacket, there's no fastening at the front, but if you want, you can add buttons. There's space to do so. I also thought for a second to add like little bow ties at the front. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun doing this project. I marked this pattern as intermediate, but it's definitely beginner friendly. I would highly recommend you to try it out. And thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one. Bye!